How beautiful. Lovely arrangement, lovely angel choir. Can I call you guys the angel choir? Is that okay? Yes. And you told me yesterday, how many years has it been since you played the clarinet? 30 years. You just bought it, right? Oh, no, another one, I mean. Didn't you say you just bought that one? Yeah. Yeah. That is a talent. I feel blessed. I'll just kind of groove and that. We really don't need to do a talk yet. I think you can just come up and play some more music. How are you? Good. Happy December. This is a wonderful, rich season in which we, as the light seems to fade in the northern hemisphere, we celebrate light. Isn't that an interesting thing? Isn't that kind of a new thought idea? That we don't pay attention to what's happening out here, but we honor a truth. We honor and start listening to what's happening within. And so it's a rich season. We have these wonderful holidays such as Hanukkah and the solstice and Christmas, in which we celebrate that light in the darkness and remind ourselves of the rebirth of the light. We remind ourselves of that, as the reading talked about, the summer that is always present within winter. Howard Thurman, a great minister, said that we walk, when we're in times of darkness, we can walk with remembered radiance. We can walk in remembered radiance. And what I would say is, not only do we walk with remembered radiance, we walk with the awareness that the radiance is within us already. We are the radiance, as we remember that. And so this is a time where, even though it looks like darkness outside, and how many of us have had times in our lives where it looks like darkness all around us, right? Darkness to the left of me, darkness to the right of me, darkness ahead of me, into the chasm road, the 600. But we remember the light within us. We remember who we truly are. And so today we're going to celebrate one of those celebrations that's not well known in this country, in this particular tradition, but is celebrated by Buddhists throughout the world, which is Bodhi Day. Popping. Bodhi Day. And it's the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. It's celebrated tomorrow in much of the Buddhist world. And so we're going to take a look, because the life of the Buddha is just like a lot of other sacred stories, a lot of the lives of Jesus and the celebration of Hanukkah. It's a sacred story. It's a soul story. And it has richness for it. It's not just about some guy, 2,500 years ago. It has richness for us and metaphor and meaning for us today. So we're going to take a look at that life, the life of the Buddha. And so, just like Jesus wasn't born Mr. Christ, yes, that is a joke. Buddha wasn't born Mr. Buddha. Okay? He was born Siddhartha Gautama. Gautama was his family name, was his last name, just like Robinson is my family name. He was born, the family name was Gautama. Siddhartha, which is the name that he was given, means one who achieves his aim. One who achieves his aim. A lot of us have names that say one who gets partway to their aim. Not really, but it's not that kind of a name. And so it's a powerful name for a person who came to the earth to move into the final stage of Buddhahood. And there's in the traditional story, there's all sorts of stuff about his birth and miraculous things that happened and his lives ahead of time in the angelic realm and stuff. We have a wonderful song about angels afterwards. Ernest Holmes talked about the angelic realm. He said there are that the infinite is infinite, and so its expressions must be infinite. And so to think that only just this body, this physical realm as we know it, is the only realm possible within spirit, it seems ludicrous. And so there's all sorts of other possibilities. And so in the Buddhism, there's also all these different levels of where people can exist and beings can exist. And so he lived in one of those levels and finally descended into his mother's womb with, of course, an immaculate conception. He was born under a tree in a garden without any pain to his mother. Moms, wouldn't you like that kind of a baby? Yeah. And so all these wonderful things. And of course, a wise man who had been up in a cave and as a hermit for 20 or 30 years came out of his cave and down to pronounce that this was a great enlightened being who was either going to be a great king or a great holy man. And so all that stuff, we're gonna kind of skip through that stuff. We're gonna move into a little bit later. And so we'll meet his father, who is a wonderful king, prince, very wealthy in India. And his father heard, he knew of this prophecy, and he says, let's see, king, holy man, king, holy man, king. I want my kid to be a king. The heck with that holy man stuff, And so what he did was he raised him in such a way. There had been a prediction that if the Buddha ever contemplated, or if Siddhartha ever contemplated human suffering, he would become a renunciate. He would give up all of his life, and he would become a mendicant, in a saffron robe, begging for alms, and spend the rest of his life doing that. And so Dad says, that's not for my kid. I want my kid to have the best. And so he gives him this absolutely pampered life, completely protected from human suffering, and also, interestingly enough, completely protected from religious teaching of any kind. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Some of us like to raise our kids today that way. Though we've been called the nanny state, recently and stuff like that. But we look at that protection. What is it that I want to protect? And so there's a couple of lessons to take a look at in this process. He keeps them away from suffering. The question to ask ourselves is, if we stay away from suffering, when we finally encounter it, do we have the strength to handle it? A scientist one time was studying butterflies, and butterflies, when they come out of their cocoon, when they finally get to that, have to wrestle their way and fight their way out of the cocoon, and it's a major struggle, and some of them don't make it. Some of them die in the process of trying to get out of the cocoon. So she said, what would happen if I was to assist those butterflies, if I was to help them as soon as they start the struggle, to cut them out of the cocoon and make their life easier? And what happened was they all died extremely quickly because they never developed the strength to live in and deal with the world. And so the suffering process, the process that we call suffering, the process of dealing with the human condition, the stuff, is our way of strengthening ourselves to deal with the world. The other place I look at this metaphor of suffering is, what are we protecting ourselves from? Where do we avoid dealing with that, the dark, dirty, ugly, that stuff we kind of try to keep tucked in that back closet back there? I have a room in my house that I haven't fully unpacked yet, okay? It's the messy room. It's I call it, I'm a Harry Potter fan, so I call it the room of remembrance, where everything is stuffed away, or it's like I think it's the third floor of Hogwarts, where it's like, don't go up there to the right side unless you want to meet a painful and certain death. So it's kind of like that room. We all have those kind of rooms, and we have them within ourselves in many cases. And so we avoid taking that class that will challenge us. We avoid doing that spiritual practice that we need to do. We avoid seeing that practitioner who we know is I was sitting with a practitioner last night talking, and she says, I see a certain person when I want to get bopped in the face. So, and when I really want to get challenged, when I really want to work through my stuff, I see a certain person. And so we avoid seeing that kind of a person who will actually challenge us. Robert Bly once described depression as being trapped in the doorway, trapped in a threshold, where behind us is the light, and we can't go back to that. And before us is our pain, and our hurt, and our fears. But we're too afraid to step into that because we're afraid we'll be swallowed up by the whole process. So we stand in the doorway, and we can't move forward, and we can't move back. And he said that's what depression really is. And so what we're invited to do is what the Buddha eventually does, is to step through the doorway, to step across the threshold and start to actually deal with the shadows. So we come out of that protective state. The other thing that's interesting from this is, of course, his father tried to protect him from this, and in the process of protecting him, as we often do, sets up the very process that he was trying to keep from happening. How many of you have ever tried to make something not happen, and even in the process of making it not happen, you set it up so that it happens? You know what I'm talking about? Yep, hands up, yep, I see it. So that's what his dad does, and it's a good reminder. It's like, stop trying to make it not happen. Let it happen. Let it unfold. So eventually the Buddha, he gets married at 16. He has a kid. It's an arranged marriage, of course. He names his kid Rahula, which in Indian means chain or fetter. Here's my kid, the chain. He probably needed some therapy. He actually turns out well in the end too, but he probably needed a little help along the way. But he viewed him as something that was holding him back from his path. Finally, at 29 years old, he said, "What's out beyond the palace walls?" He gets his charioteer, and imagine you're the charioteer of Siddhartha. You're ordered by his father to never, ever, ever take him outside the city walls, or the palace walls. And at the same time, you're supposed to give him everything he wants. And finally, he wants to go outside the city walls, or the palace walls. It's like, okay, I'm in a darned if I do and darned if I don't state, And so he finally takes him outside the city, the palace walls, and out into the regular populace, and he has what are known as the four sights. And so what he meets is an old man. And he's been protected from old people. He's been protected from aging and the approach of death. So he meets an old person. He meets a sick, diseased person. He sees a corpse. And he sees a mendicant, a monk who's in the saffron robes and sitting in meditation and practicing. And these cause so much distress. He's never grown up with this. It's a shock to his system. And perhaps the best thing his dad could have done was just let him see all this stuff, and it would have been, he would have been immune to it by the time he was 29. But it's such a shock to his system that he declares himself, he says, "I'm going to become a mendicant. I'm going to renounce everything. Because I need to go and find out what is the cause of human suffering and how is it relieved." He sees this, he's so traumatized by it. He begins with this great passion. There's a Hindu word, an Indian word that says samvega, and it's that spiritual urgency. I have to do this. I must do this. Sometimes some of you have probably experienced that point in your life where something you have to do it. And it has to be done. You have to get this job or leave this job. Get this relationship, leave this relationship. There's something you have to do. You know it's yours to do. And you finally say, "You know what? I'm going to do this thing." And it's that spiritual urgency. And it's what carries us through the initial rough stages. It's what carries the Buddha through the initial rough stages of becoming that mendicant, becoming that monk. He has to do it. How many of you have experienced that at some point in time in your life? Yeah, that passion, that I've got to do this. And so we move into that samvega energy. And so he gets a saffron robe and becomes, he goes to a different city and he sits and begs alms and starts to live in that consciousness, live that path. And he hasn't been there very long before the men of the king of that particular city recognize who he is. And so the king comes down to him and it's like, "What are you doing?" He says, "Take my throne. I'll offer you my throne." The king was willing to step down. He has that much regard for the Buddha, for Siddhartha and his father, that he's willing to step off of his throne and offer it to this young man. So often when we start on a spiritual path, so often when we start down the path of shifting our lives, our wonderful motto is change your thinking, change your life. And as one of my teachers said, changing your thinking is easy. It's the keeping it changed that's the challenge. And so here's this wonderful offer. Come back. Come back to the old life. You were meant to be a king, a prince. Come back. And of course, Siddhartha, being who he is, says no. Later on, he begins to study with a couple of different yogic teachers in succession who teach him deep yogic meditation. And in each case, he's such a quick study and he's so brilliant at it that in each case, the teacher offers him this particular school that he's the head of. Become the leader of this. You're more brilliant than I am. Become the leader of this school. And of course, in both cases, Siddhartha says no, because he's not here to become the leader of his school. He's here to find the cause and the relief for human suffering. There's a wonderful phrase in the Hebrew Bible that says, "Keep thine eyes single." Keep thine eyes single. And he does. He stays with that focus. This is what I'm here to do. And so there's these wonderful offerings of power, which is oftentimes that which gets us. And he says no. So he follows a path for the next 5 or 6 years of extreme self-deprivation. He's down to, according to legend, eating 1 grain of rice or 1 nut or 1 leaf a day. Contemplate that for a moment. For years. Okay? Anybody want that diet? I'm going to put my hand down. I don't want that diet. I'm doing good when I only have 1 piece of chocolate a day, but a little sushi to go with it. He has 5 monks, fellow monks, who are also walking this path with him, who are their companions together on this path. Finally, after 5 or 6 years of this, he's at a point where he's so hungry, and he's so starving, he's so wasted away. He's down by a river, and he passes out and falls into the river and nearly drowns. Manages to pull himself back up out of the river, crawls over to a tree and sits down at the base of the tree and starts to meditate. And while he's there, this young woman from the village sees him there, and he's so wasted away that she thinks he's a spirit. She doesn't see him as a human person. She thinks he's a spirit, and what she thinks is he's the tree spirit. And the tree spirit is there to grant her wish of a husband and a child. And so she brings him what you do to tree spirits. She brings him food as an offering. And so he eats the food, which is completely against what he was standing for. His 5 friends, leave him in disgust. You've fallen off the wagon. You are no longer participating. You've given up. You've sold out to food. And so, but in the meantime, he finally comes to his senses, and he says, this whole self-deprivation thing isn't it. The meditation part, that's it. But getting myself in such a weakened state that I'm nearly going to die, that isn't it. And so he comes out with what's known as today the middle way. Neither self-indulgence nor self-deprivation. The middle way. Not too much of this, not too little of this. And so he begins to walk the middle way. And I love this process because to me the young woman from the village represents the divine feminine. Up until this time, his journey has all been with men. I have a confession to make. We men sometimes take things too far. I know this is news to many of you. A couple of you might know this about men, right? We can take it, if big is good, then bigger is better, and even bigger is even more better, right? Guys, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Some of you? Somebody support me? Am I the only one? Oh my goodness. First service, they knew what I was talking about. So I guess that's all the first service. But he was all into this masculine intellectual, how to take it and take it deeper and take it further. And if I can, if a little less food is good, then even more or less food is better, and take it down to 1 grain of rice a day. So finally, this wonderful divine feminine appeals to his heart, brings some balance into his life, and he begins to see the middle way. And what I view it as is connects the head and the heart. So his head in one way was in the right place. He knew the meditation. But the whole deprivation thing was too much. And so the heart connects with that. And so now he's connected head and heart. He's balanced in that spiritual practice. And so finally he sits underneath this particular banyan tree, which is today known as the Bodhi tree. And he simply sits down and he says, I'm going to sit here in meditation, in this deep yogic meditation, until I get the answer, and I'm not leaving until either I get the answer or I die. Now that's called going for it. That's called commitment. Okay? I'm not quitting. This is living up to his name. This is living up to the name of he who achieves his aim. And it's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this, I'm going to be here until this happens, or I'm out of here. One of the two. And so while he's there, he's tempted by the 3 daughters of the demon Mara. There's always got to be a demon, running around here somewhere. And so Mara is in this case a masculine demon, and he's got 3 daughters who come to him to seduce him and try and make it. And if you notice the parallels between Jesus out in the desert and his 3 temptations from Satan, so this is very parallel to this, just 500 years earlier. And so the 3 daughters represent 3 different qualities. One is craving. They represent the cravings for the different things in life. Another one represents boredom. You ever sat in meditation for a while? Okay. You ever sat in meditation for 7 weeks solid? And then finally, passion or lust, desire. Not the desire that we necessarily talk about for what is I want in my life, but on the over-the-top desire. I've got to have that, It's like me with chocolate, okay? That kind of lust, And so these 3 things come to him. And if you're a meditator at all, you know that at some point in time you've encountered those 3 daughters, haven't you? At least one of them somewhere has danced in your life. Whether it's boredom or whether it's the thinking about what it is I'm supposed to be doing in my life and the groceries I'm supposed to buy and all that stuff. And so the Buddha sits there and sits in consciousness. And it's shown that when he was there, he was sitting with his left palm in his lap. And his right hand is on his knee with the fingers pointed down, in some pictures touching the ground or at least aimed at the ground, because he is grounding himself to the earth, which is a powerful process when we're being tempted to come back and ground ourselves to the earth. Ground ourselves to that which keeps us centered. That wonderful reading we had today that talks about the roots during the wintertime that seek the warmth of the earth. That warmth is always there. When the leaves are no longer growing because there's not enough light to sustain the photosynthesis that it takes and they fall away, the roots are still going and so deepening into the earth. And so it's a reminder for us in our spiritual practice to stay grounded. That is, the temptations in our lives to stay grounded. As the temptations swirl around us. Have you noticed this is a time of year that a lot of temptations swirl around us? Buy, more. I put up some lights in my house, and I put up some more lights in my house, and pretty soon I'm going to put up some more, and I won't. But I'm done. But it's like, how many lights, there are some people that can go, how many lights can I put up on my house and in my yard and stuff like that. So there's all this temptation. There's this wonderful time where we can get out of the middle way if we let ourselves do it. I'm supposed to buy presents for these people, but maybe I should buy presents for these people too. And I should probably buy presents for those. But is this one good enough? Maybe I should buy 2 for that person, bigger ones or whatever. And so, do we stay with our middle way? Do we stay grounded as these temptations, as this process comes? And so the Buddha stayed grounded. He walked this path, and on the 49th day, on the morning of the 49th day, it said that as the morning star rose in the early dawn sky, he had a moment where he saw everything. And he saw it, and it had this moment of complete vision and complete enlightenment. And out of that, he created his philosophy known as the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Pathway. And the Four Noble Truths, these are the cores of Buddha, the core of Buddhism. There's a number of different translations. I love this particular way of phrasing this. The Four Noble Truths are, number one, all temporary things or temporary states are unsatisfying. All temporary things. Most of that is what we see around us. Do you ever remember the build-up we always get for Christmas? How it's going to be so fabulous, now it's so wonderful. And it comes and it goes, and we kind of look back and say, well, okay, now what? And maybe that wasn't quite so as fabulous as I wanted. It was never as good as we had it in our mind, right? It never lives up to that Norman Rockwell painting of either Thanksgiving or Christmas. Anybody notice besides me that's, yeah. And so that's the temporary state, I eat one chocolate piece and it satisfies me for a moment, but does it keep on satisfying? No. And so I need a little more and a little more. Could you give me some cookies, by the way, out of the bookstore? No. All temporary states and all temporary things are unsatisfying. Number 2, because we crave and cling to these things, we suffer. Because we crave and cling to, because we don't go for the deep spiritual truth, because we mess around and stay involved with the temporary state of things and keep on going and going and going after those again. A friend of mine, once said, if you could buy the book that would change your life forever, that would really truly do it, would you buy it again? Some of you with full bookshelves know what I'm talking about. Okay, would you buy it again? Sylvia's going to throw things at me. I don't think she's going to hear me. Okay, good. I'm in trouble with Sylvia. Because we crave and cling to these things that we suffer. Noble truth number 3, which is the self-obvious one. If we stop craving and clinging, we're free. Right. Obvious, right? Now, how? And that's number 4. The way to free yourself is to follow the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the Buddhist path. The Noble Eightfold Path starts off by having, it's a series of right this. And right is as in not right and wrong, but as in healthy, as in balance, as in correct. And so the first one is a healthy view, right view. How do I perceive the world? How am I perceiving life? Is it in alignment with capital T truth? This is what we teach also, to clear out our beliefs, our old belief systems. When we look at the glass, is it half full? Is it half empty? Or is it exactly perfectly in balance and perfect as it is? What's my view of life? Am I willing to see it? So we have right view. From right view, we create right intention. It's not enough to just have a right view. Now we need to move that view into life itself, into our livingness. That's why I'm doing this intentions retreat. It's wonderful to have all this highfalutin thought, but as I mentioned, Ernest says we're not a passive teaching, we're an active teaching that says, now move that into life. Because the Buddha isn't about, and Buddhism isn't about finding some nirvana up in heaven where we get to sing with the angelic choir for the rest of our lives. We arrive at some place and we're done. It's about how to live completely and consciously and continuously in this world, but in a state of enlightenment and a state of freedom. How does that sound? To live in this world in a state of freedom. So right intention is the second one. Right speech. Once we have our view correct, once we have our intention correct, we begin to speak in alignment with that. We drop out of our speech, a friend of mine says the 3 C's, which are complaining, criticism, and comparing. I would add the fourth one as a G, which is gossip. And so we stop doing that. We drop all that stuff out, and we start to speak in alignment with our spiritual truth. And then from right speech, we move into right action. So we begin to walk our talk. So we have our view clear. We have our intentions correct. We are beginning to speak the truth, and now we're beginning to walk the truth. We're in alignment with that. And out of that comes the fifth one, which is right livelihood. And right livelihood isn't just what we do for 8 hours a day at a job. Right livelihood is our whole life itself. Our structures begin to stabilize. Our relationships, our body, our finances, what we do for a career, everything begins to stabilize. We begin to live in right consciousness, right livelihood. We are living a life that is in alignment with our true intention, our highest view. From that place, then, we make right effort. And right effort means that we're just directing our efforts in the direction we want to go. How many of you, like me, have spun your wheels doing effort in directions that, even when you're getting into it, you especially know down the road, it's like, I should never put that much effort into that process. Anybody besides me? Yeah. So right effort. We're putting our effort into exactly where we're going. Years ago, when I was a cyclist, I used to do meditation while I bicycled. I would train on a track, so I was not in traffic. Closed bicycle track, and I started to meditate, and I started to notice that my muscles would fight with each other, and I began to train them to just be all in alignment, that every stroke, every pedal stroke I did was all in alignment, the energy was all moving straight into my pedals, and I wasn't fighting with myself. So is our effort right effort? And then we move into right mindfulness. Are we paying attention? Are we living in a balance? Am I living in my life paying attention to what I'm doing? I'm teaching a meditation class right now, and we've talked about that meditation is not just something we sit and do for a certain amount of time, at a certain point in the day, but it becomes the way that we live. That what I'm doing, if I'm drinking a glass of water, if I'm speaking with a person, whatever, if I'm driving my car, whatever I'm doing, I am fully mindful and I'm fully present with it. And so we have right mindfulness. And finally, out of that then comes right concentration. And so by this time we are focused and our mind is concentrated in the direction and on what we want to do. And so this is the Eightfold Path. And when we follow it, and as we move more and more in alignment with that, we live in peace. And the idea of the Buddhism is to live in that peace, is to live free from suffering. And so I wanted to invite you this week to do 3 things to begin to practice this process, to begin to live in that light. The first one is to answer the question, what am I hiding and protecting myself from? See, we'll never live in peace if we've got that little closet full of stuff that we don't want to deal with. Because we know it's there, right? You know it's there. Whether you want to admit it or not, you know it's there if it's there. What is it that I'm avoiding? What is it that I'm hiding or protecting myself from? And finally approaching it with that samvega, that spiritual urgency that, I'm going to finally deal with that. I've been putting it off, I've been hanging on to this story, I've been hanging on to this hurt, I've been hanging on to whatever it is for all my life, I've been letting it run my life. I'm done with it running my life. I'm flipping the tables and I'm taking command of it. I'm running my life from right view and right intention. So what is it that I'm hiding from or protecting myself from? Secondly, am I willing to walk the middle path? It's a great time to practice that, isn't it? With all the pulls we have. Am I willing to walk the middle path? Not too much, not too little. Am I willing to just stay in that balanced state? And then finally, number 3, to listen. What is calling me? And we talked about the Buddha had this call to free humanity from suffering, to find and understand the cause of human suffering, and to find the way out of that human suffering. What is calling you? What is your spiritual call? And it may not be some huge thing. You may sit there and go, I'm no Buddha. I haven't lived all these lifetimes of, being a bodhisattva and all that stuff. But something is calling each of us. And what I know is that as we answer each call, a bigger call comes. What is it right now that's calling you spiritually? What is it right now that your soul knows that it's here to do? And to begin to do that, to begin to say, yes, I am willing to make that happen. I'm willing to answer that call. I'm willing to be that person. I'm willing to be the Buddha within me. And I'm willing to go all the way. That's your homework for this week. Are you willing to take that on? Okay. So we're asking, what am I hiding from? We're beginning to walk the middle and start to deal with it. Beginning to walk the middle path. We're beginning to listen and say, what am I called to? And say, yes, I am willing to answer. I'm picking up the phone and I'm answering, and I'm not putting the phone down this time. Okay? I'm going to leave you with a greeting, a Buddhist greeting, that says, Buddhu Saranai. May the peace of the Buddha be with you. Buddhu Saranai. The peace of the Buddha is not a destination, but a way of living in this world. So may this week and during this time, may you live in that peace of the Buddha. May you live in that harmonious way. May you live with compassion and kindness for yourself and all beings. But when we see somebody who's out of alignment, and we get plenty of examples, just watch the news for people who don't quite understand the Eightfold Path, right? When we see people like that, instead of judging or criticizing, we have compassion and we approach with kindness and we hold them in love. Are you willing to do that and play with that? Great. So I'm going to invite Holly up to play a little bit of background, what I call tinkle music. I'm not sure what the proper... behind my prayer, and we're going to do a prayer. So I invite you to join me in remembering that there is only one infinite presence. Pure love, pure joy, pure peace, pure bliss. That presence, that one, is indeed all that there is. It is the light of the infinite. It is the light that never goes dark, that never grows dim. It is the love that never has no beginning and has no end. It never stops, always fully present. It is the life that has no beginning and no end, the absolute aliveness of this infinite universe. And it is the peace that is never disturbed, the peace that always is, the peace that passes understanding, the peace that passes conditioning. That infinite presence, that infinite one, is all that there is. And because it is all there is, each one of us is one of that already. We can't be anywhere but within that presence, within that oneness. And so we recognize that we already are the light. We already are the love. We already are the peace. We already are the joy and the bliss. That this is our true nature, unencumbered by the stories and the stuff and the incidents and the processes that have happened in our lives, the temporary things. As we allow that to fall away, we discover the deep-rooted summer that lives within us. We discover this deep light, this deep love, this deep peace that we are already. And so as we recognize that, I speak my word that each of us awakens to this more deeply, more fully. that we experience this in ways that are transformative for us, in ways that are powerful. We experience that samvega, that spiritual urgency, and we say yes to it. We allow that to express as our lives here and now. And for all that process, for the joy, for the love, for the life, for the light, for the peace that we experience, that we express, I am grateful. I know it is good. It is the good, in the capital G, good. That we are one of this, and we manifest this, we experience this, we express this in our lives, and so we become lights into the world. We become our own Buddhas in the world. Buddha simply means one who is awake, one who is enlightened. And so as we wake up, we become that. And so I release this word into a law that knows exactly how to bring it forth in each person's life here, knowing that it does so with ease, with grace, with perfection, with the beauty of Spirit that is always at work. It is done for each of us. And we say yes, yea, amen, and together we say, and so it is. Thank you.
To love, serve.